Hello and welcome along. Today we're going to talk about the Iron Hands and specifically the time before they were reunited with Ferrus Manus. Now he would be the person that actually named them the Iron Hands. So before this they were known as the 10th Legion. So the Iron Hands were recruited interestingly generally from around Old Earth, but quite a large number, relatively large number, came from what was known as Old Albia. So that corresponds to the British Isles or Great Britain in the real world, and that's probably it's interesting, but because that's where Games Workshop are based. It's also where I'm from. I thought relatively interesting that they were more heavily recruited from Old Albia. It's also interesting because the relationship of Old Albia to the emperor is a little bit different than some of the other parts of Earth that he conquered. So these early Iron Hands were recruited from Old Albia, along with early Death Guard and Night Lords. Now, if you've seen my previous video on Night Lords, you'll know that they were essentially recruited from a prison complex, and so that prison complex was actually located in Old Albia. But the general population of Old Albia gave recruits to mostly to the Death Guard, but also quite a large number to the Iron Hands. So Old Albia is different from much of the rest of Terra during the Unification Wars, in that he was actually an ally of the Emperor in these early days and fought with him against the Pan-Pacific Empire. Although having fought alongside the Emperor against the Pan-Pacific Empire, Old Albia would eventually become an enemy of the Emperor. Now, this is basically because he wanted everyone to unite under one leader, him across all of Terra, before he could spread across the stars. It was inevitable, really, that he would, at some point, once they had reached the point where they were no longer useful allies, to say, you've got to join me, basically. And unfortunately, for both sides, really, they were not willing to accept this, the leaders of Old Albia, and this led to a war, and mainly due to they were very proud people, quite stubborn, and they just didn't want to bend the knee, as it were, to anyone else. And now they performed so well during the war that the Emperor had to seek negotiation. So they fought against the Thunder Warriors of the Emperor, and they actually had troops which were known as Ironside's clan soldiers, which kind of is a foreshadowing of the clan structure of Medusa, although there is no a direct link here. They also had proto-dreadnoughts. So there is again a sort of affinity to machinery and working with heavy armor and so on that the Legion would develop later on. And with both a kind of a very determined attitude and good equipment, good troops, they were able to force the Emperor to a stalemate, essentially, which is something that not many people have achieved. So that's pretty impressive in its own right. Now, eventually, the Emperor realized that this was not going to go anywhere, and that he developed an admiration as well for these people who were fighting so well. And he decided to pull out the big diplomacy cards, and he personally negotiated a peace with the leaders of Old Albia, and basically promising them, glory amongst the stars after you join with me. That will lead to a better future for both of us. And he was able to persuade them that this was the best course forward. And once they joined, they then became a very strong and important part of the new Imperium. So at that point, then he could start recruiting from the population. As I said, the Night Lords were recruited from the prison system, and the Death Guard and the Iron Hands were recruited from the general population. So the Death Guard seemed to have been most influenced by the culture of Old Albia, and they had the most recruits, but the Iron Hands also had a significant number of recruits from there. As the war progressed, the Iron Hands developed a reputation for being extremely good at highly coordinated operations, being very fiercely disciplined but yet aggressive at the same time, which is a very useful combination, and being able to focus their anger very effectively into the tasks that they were given. So they weren't out of control like some of the other legions developed a reputation for. And although they were brutal, they were very efficient in their brutality. And they managed to achieve very good results in that where they would not receive as many casualties as would be expected despite fighting against heavy resistance. And now this culminated in a very large campaign against an early Orc empire in the very early parts of the Great Crusade. There was a large Orc empire that had to be defeated, and the imperial forces were arrayed against this empire, this Orc empire, and the Iron Hands were chosen to take a key planet within this empire known as Rust. Now, this was like a large mining planet, essentially, where the Orcs were using forced labor of human slaves to do the mining, and it was supplying a lot of their resources to this empire. So it was a key objective within the greater campaign. So the Iron Hands at that time were led by a Lord Commander. I think it's pronounced Amadeus Duquesne. Let's just call him Duquesne from now on. So this Lord Commander Duquesne came up with this plan, effectively, to conquer this Orc planet. Now, the Orcs, obviously there's Orcs, there's huge numbers of them, and they were completely dug in. They had huge numbers of human slaves as well, and the idea was try and not kill too many of the humans. Maybe not the best legion to send if you don't want to kill the humans, but anyway, so they were given this task, and they had support from a large Imperial army contingent, who were the Ursian Velites, and a large contingent of Legio Cybernetica, who are basically the part of the Mechanicum that have the automata. These two units were given to the Iron Hands to support this operation. Kane came up with a plan called the Hammer and the Storm, which essentially is a tactic whereby you put down a very large portion of your force onto a planet in a sort of fixed location. Now, what they did is they deployed the Ursian Velites in a massive triangle, and he just told them to hold their position. And this drew out the Orcs. So the Orcs obviously are not known for their tactical genius, and also were known for essentially attacking anything nearby. So once they saw this massive deployed force of Imperial army, they obviously were going to attack it. So they just kept attacking and attacking and attacking, and this drew out almost all of the Orcs into this full-scale attack against these Imperial army troops. Now, they were taking quite a battering. Many commanders would have maybe pulled them out, reinforced them, or allowed them to break out or whatever, but Duquesne basically made them stay in one place, take this attack, and just slowly get depleted. So they were just being battered and battered by Orcs, starting to be overrun. But eventually, he sees the point at which the Orcs are basically completely committed to the battle, and they've deployed essentially 100% of their forces. And at this point, he swoops in with the Legio Cybernetica and the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands, early Iron Hands, and they are the Hammer. So they come in smashing into the Orcs in a very concentrated armored thrust and just obliterate them, basically. So they throw the Orcs back, smash, kill many Orcs, and then they allow the Ursian Velites to retreat, who then take on the job of basically guarding landing zones and so on. And then they continued this battle against the now sort of disorganized, depleted Orcs until they were essentially wiped out. And that gained him and the Legion great fame. And so this was seen as a very impressive victory, because not only did they win, which is obviously the main point, they didn't actually suffer many casualties, considering the enormous numbers of Orcs they were up against. So they lost about a fifth of the Legion. Now, that's a pretty high number, but given the standards of the time and what they were up against, this was actually considered a great victory. So this victory was so impressive that the Ultramarines and the Iron Warriors both started to copy this tactic and used it throughout this big campaign against this Orc Empire. And so I think that goes to show just how impressive the early Iron Warriors were considered, particularly in this engagement, but in general, that two legions are actually renowned for being very good at tactics. Actually copied the tactic that they had first used. Now, you might think that using such tactics got them a bad reputation with the Imperial army because of what they did to the Ursian Velites, but actually the Velites kind of looked up to them with a kind of superstitious awe and were quite loyal to them. So although they did take heavy casualties in the early parts of the battle, they were saved from the worst of the later parts of the battle. So they kind of accepted their role in this tactic. So essentially, the Legion had established itself as a very impressive military organization. They had built up relatively close links to the Ursian Velites, and they gained the name the Stormwalkers from the Ursians, actually, which shows some kind of reverence for them, I think, and a bond between the two units. And they'd also gained an appreciation for the Legio Cybernetica as well, and how effective automata can be when used correctly in battle. And particularly, they gained this affinity for using heavy armor, so tanks being used in close support to infantry, and that became one of their main tactics as well. Now, so at this time, they were organized into chapters, but later, when they would be reunited with Ferrus, they would take on a clan structure, which kind of harks back to the early recruits of old Albia, who lived in a clan structure as well. But they didn't carry that into the legions. They adopted the standard chapter structure, which was of the early legions. So the legion at this point were set to expand out across the galaxy like the other legions, and seemingly gain great accolades, great victories under Duquesne as part of the Great Crusade. However, they were then given the news that Ferrus had been found. So Ferrus was the third Primarch to be found. So after Horus and Leman Russ, then Ferrus. So that changed everything for the Legion, because once your Primarch's discovered, you have to go and meet them. And Ferrus had didn't really consider the Iron Hands his, and he basically didn't like the fact that they weren't here. So although he recognised the successes that they've had and so on, he wanted to basically rebuild them in his own image, and so he kind of dismantled their structure, did away with the chapter structure, introduced the clan structure. But he didn't just introduce a clan structure. He basically got the Astartes, the leading Astartes, to take over the job as the clan nobility on Medusa. So, and they did this brutally, as all things the Iron Hands do, and they basically eliminated with violence the existing clan nobility and took on those positions as the new nobility, and that was it. So then from then on, each clan would recruit into their own clan rather than a joint legion recruitment system. Each clan would recruit, and so the clan loyalties became very, very deeply embedded within the legion under Ferrus Manus and on Medusa. And there were always tensions between the clans, and this we aren't going to go into that here, but this did lead to some of the later problems that the Legion had. Also, Ferrus had this internal issue with hate. He didn't like the fact that he had these metal arms, but at the same time, he didn't want to give them up. So he felt that it was a weakness in himself that he couldn't give them up. And he didn't like the fact that the Iron Hands started to imitate him, and by taking on like cybernetic augmentation. And he saw it as a weakness and an addiction, essentially, that something that he did want to remove, but he couldn't quite get himself to do it at this point. So he kind of pledged that he would do it at some point at some point in the future after the Great Crusade. Of course, that never happened because he was killed. Whether he would ever have gone through with that is hard to say. But there you go. So I thought the Iron Hands are quite interesting, actually. I hadn't realised how respected and impressive they were in the early days, and also how short those early days were before they were reunited with Ferrus and were changed after that point. Now, of course, I'm not saying that they didn't do important things after Ferrus took over, but they were just different. They'd changed the character of the Legion quite considerably. And they hadn't started to go down the road of essentially trying to eliminate flesh until they met Ferrus. So they were relatively normal in terms of their belief in humanity and in themselves as super enhanced beings, of biological beings. They hadn't developed this distaste for biology, and really that did come about because of their meeting with Ferrus. And although he didn't try and make them do that, it was a combination of maybe from the gene seed, a weakness psychologically within them, and the fact that he had these augmented arms that that made them start to go down that path, which is which I would say was unfortunate. Maybe some people would say was actually a good thing. But I think when you're a super soldier, you are you're already a pinnacle of biology. You can see what kind of incredible things that enhanced biology can achieve. You don't really need to start eliminating that enhanced biology by replacing it with cybernetic arms and so on, which any human could be doing anyway. There you go. So let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share, please. Thank you very much. I will see you next time.